Hi all, in my last video I had installed an XTRONS head unit in my Fiat 500X, and at the end of the video I had mentioned that I wasn't happy with the sound quality coming out of it, and I was thinking of installing an external amplifier to improve sound quality. Well, here's the amplifier. Let's install it. What I opted for is this, a Sony XM-S400D 45 watt per channel amplifier. As you can see, it's a little thing. This amplifier is designed to fit in the cavity along with your head unit, making installation actually very simple. As you can see, there are some cables included with it. On the input side we have these cables, and on the output side we have this set of cables here. I'm going to explain how all this works in terms of connecting this to the XTRONS unit. If you have a different head unit, your experience may be a little bit different. But the amplifier has an input side and an output side. And on the input side, Sony provides us two options to get the signal from our head unit into the amplifier. The first, and the one that we're not going to use with the XTRONS, is to use the speaker wires themselves. Basically, you would cut the wires going from the head unit to your speakers, and you would stick this in between them. But we're not going to use that. What we're going to do instead is use this. These are low-level line inputs. These are the same kinds of inputs you see on home audio equipment, RCA connectors. And as you can see here, we have front and rear, and for each we have a right and a left channel. And on the back of your XTRONS, you're going to see the mates to these connections. And all you simply do is connect, front right to this one, front left to this one, rear right to this one, rear left to this one. Tape them up or secure them in some way so they don't come apart, and plug this into the input side of your amplifier. And now you've got the audio going into the amplifier. With our wires connected to the input side of the amplifier, you'll see that there's some three switches here. For the XTRONS, you want to set the input select to 4-channel. Low pass filter off, high pass filter off. Because we're using 4-channel input, meaning each speaker has its own individual input, we do not need to use the low pass or high pass filters that are built into the amplifier itself. If we were only doing a 2-channel input, where the amplifier only receives a left and a right, then we would use these to turn on the filters for the front and back speakers, but we don't need those with the XTRONS. Let's talk about this side of the amplifier, because that's where the bulk of our work is going to be. You can see in this bundle of wires, first we have the 8 speaker wires, which we'll talk about later. Then we have 3 additional wires. Yellow is power for the amplifier. We need to provide it with a 15 amp power source. The black with the spade on the end is our ground. We will attach this to some sort of metal bolt attached to the car to provide ground for the amplifier. The third is this blue wire. This is the amplifier remote on-off signal. So the XTRONS does provide this signal. Again, it will be a blue wire coming from the XTRONS unit, and it will be labeled amplifier remote. And what that does is when the head unit turns on, it will send a signal to the amplifier to turn itself on. And again, when you turn the head unit off, it will send a signal to the amplifier to turn the amplifier off. Now, you don't necessarily have to use this wire if you don't want to. Some head units don't even offer this. In that case, we would solve the problem of turning this on and off with the power wire. Now, your car has 2 different types of power, constant power and switched power. Some of the electrical devices in your car need to remain powered on even after you've shut the car off. Those are connected to constant power. Other devices don't need to be on when you shut the car off. Those are connected to a switched power source. If we connect the amplifier to a switched power source, it negates the need for this wire, because the amplifier will be on when the car is running and off when it's not. Fortunately, Fiat has provided a very clever solution to this, which will make providing power to our amplifier easy. Let me show you. So what I have here is a partial listing of the fuses in the fuse box in the engine compartment of our car. As you know, in the center console we have a power outlet, a 12 volt, that can be used to power USB devices with an adapter or to light cigarettes or whatnot. But if we look at this fuse listing, you'll see that I've got 2 of them circled, F23 and F84. Because both of them indicate they're for the power outlet. But one indicates battery power, one indicates ignition power. And this says customer installed. What does that mean? Well, what it means is Fiat gave you a choice. Depending on which socket you put that 20 amp fuse, your power outlet can be battery powered, which is constant power, or ignition powered, which means switched power. We can use a switched power source to power on and off our amplifier. So if we connect the amplifier to F84 in this circuit, that's where we can get power from. We won't have to run wires out to the battery. We won't have to go hunting for another power supply. We have one right near our head unit. Using this circuit to power our amplifier creates a situation though. Because this circuit is protected by a 20 amp fuse, the wiring for the amplifier needs to be protected by a 15 amp fuse to prevent an overheating situation. So what we will need to do is add an inline fuse between the power circuit and the wiring going into the amplifier. You can purchase inline fuses from many places. This is one I happen to have left over from another project. We would simply connect this side to our power source. This side will connect to the wiring going into our amplifier. And with a 15 amp fuse installed, that will protect the amplifier from an overcurrent situation. So far we've talked about how to get the audio signal into the amplifier. We've talked about how to power the amplifier, how to ground it, and how to potentially turn it on and off either with this signal or by using the power switch itself, or the power wire line itself I should say. Now we need to do the final piece, which is how do we get the audio out of the amplifier and to the speakers in our car. What we currently have in our car, and I admit this is a crudely drawn picture, but bear with me. We have our head unit here. We have our 8 speaker wires here. These are part of the adapter provided by XTRONS that converts the factory wiring harness into wiring that we can connect to the XTRONS. And then the factory wiring goes from here out to the speakers. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to sever these wires and reroute them from here to the amplifier so that we have something like this. Okay? So if we look at the wiring adapter that came with the Sony, you'll see that there's 8 wires for the speakers, 2 for each speaker. These are all color coded. On the wiring adapter provided by XTRONS that we just talked about, it has these same 8 wires, same color codes. So all we're going to need to do is connect, say, green to green, green with a black stripe to green with a black stripe, do that 8 times, and then we will have rerouted our speaker wiring to go through the amplifier. Hopefully that makes sense. So now with these things discussed, let's go out to the car and get started on the install. Alright folks, we're out in the car, and the first thing we should probably do is make sure we're going to be able to reach the power connections. Otherwise we're kind of dead in the water. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this socket. And to do that you need a special tool. You can buy this on Amazon. They're about $15. And this will allow us to remove the metal shell for the cigarette lighter. So the way this works is, and I'm not going to be able to get this on camera, but if you look inside the socket, you're going to see 2 black squares on opposite sides of the socket from each other. In those black squares are little plastic tabs, and those plastic tabs are holding the socket in place. So what you do is you take this tool, and I've got the battery disconnected in my car, and I suggest you do the same. And you use one end to push down on one of those black plastic tabs, and then you angle this in to press down the other black plastic tab, and then you use this to pull the socket out. Okay, as you can see, I've managed to get the tool in, pressing the 2 plastic tabs. Now I should be able to just pull this out and the socket should come right out. And there it is. Great camera work. And there's the power connector. So let's disconnect the power connector from the socket and then we'll continue. Alright, I've disconnected the socket from its connector. It's very simple. There's simply a tab on the top that you press down here, right here, and then you pull it back. Now strangely enough, this has a 3-pin connection, which is odd because it's just a power socket. It should be power and ground. I'm not sure what the 3rd wire is, the yellow one. The red one is definitely our 12-volt power supply. I'm going to verify that before we continue. I verified that the red wire is our 12-volt source, and that's what we're going to be tapping into. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tie a piece of string to this connection because I'm going to go into the footwell and pull this wire through so we can work on it. Alright, I'm in the passenger footwell. This is the center console, and this is the kick panel on the side that we're going to need to remove so we can get to the wiring. It's only held on by 3 clips and a tab at the back. All you have to do is give this a good yank and this will pop out. just like that. And that exposes our wiring. Now we're going to be able to pull the wiring back out of the cigarette lighter and work on it here. If you look carefully, you're going to see a T30 screw here. Take this out. This will allow us to move this part of the console a little bit so we can get to the wiring for the cigarette lighter. With that T30 screw removed, we can now pull this back to get access to the wiring. And if you feel around in there and look in there, I can't get a camera in there, you're going to see the wiring for the cigarette lighter. And it's just a matter of reaching in and grabbing it and then pulling it through. And there's our string. And now we're in a position where we can work on this and tap into it. Alright, so we've got the cigarette lighter out. We've been able to pull the wiring out for the cigarette lighter so we can work on it. Now we need to make sure we can get the wiring from behind our head unit, where the amplifier is going to sit, down to where the power is. So I've taken what I had, which was this metal flexible thing, and I'm not sure how well this is going to show up on video, but we have a ton of room back here, and there's kind of like a plastic vertical ledge, and behind it there's a gap. You can see that gap goes straight down to the floor. You can see the other end of that flexible spring. So that's how we're going to run the wiring from the head unit down here for power and ground. Now that we've verified we can connect the amplifier to a power source, the next step is going to be to break into the wiring here and modify it so the output from the amplifier goes to the factory speakers. So let's remove this bulk connector for the XTRONS unit, put it on the bench, and I'll show you what we need to do to make the connections. Alright, I've got the XTRONS out of the car, and here's our amplifier. Let's go through the connections that we have to make, because it's a little bit complicated, but not really. Alright, on the input side of the amplifier, we have our 4 speaker connections. Over on the XTRONS, on these auxiliary connections here, we have our 4 speaker connections. See them? They're all labeled, left, right, front, rear. Just plug them in and secure them in some way, and the input side is done. On the output side, here are the 8 speaker wires coming out of the amp that have to be connected to the speakers in the car. On the XTRONS side, here are the 8 speaker wires that were going from the amplifier in the XTRONS to the car's wiring out to the speakers. We have to break this connection here and connect these wires to this side, and that will mean the output from the amp for the speakers is now going through that harness out to the speakers in the car. On this same harness, the same connector where the speakers are, we have our power, our ground, and our amp signal. So here's the blue wire, it's the amp signal. And if we look over here on the XTRONS, we're going to see a wire, also blue. Can you read that? Amp connection. This is the signal that turns the amp on and off with the head unit. Now, because we're using a switched power supply, i.e. the power outlet cigarette lighter, you don't necessarily need to connect this, but I'm going to anyways because I like the idea of having the amp off if the car is running and I turn the radio off. That's just me. Other 2 connections are power and ground. Those are going to go down through the console and tap into, well, the power is going to tap into the cigarette lighter circuit. The ground, there's actually a grounding point in the car right near that connection. I'll show you that in a few minutes. But that's where we're going to ground it. And that should pretty much do it. Alright, so after a little bit of work, I've got the speaker wires going from the output of the Sony into the adapter that goes out to the speakers in the car. I've got the blue amp on-off wire connected. But I found a problem. As I'm looking at the inputs, they're all female. So I need to get adapters to connect them together. They'll be here tomorrow. For today, I can use some patch cables to test everything out. So let me get this back in the car and let's hook up power and ground and see how all this works. Alright, so this is how we're going to get the power cord for the amplifier from the cavity for the radio down to where the power is. I've taken my springy tool here. You could use a fish tape or some other kind of stiff, thin metal apparatus. Fish tape is great, but I just happen to have this springy thing here. springy thing. It's actually a grabber. Yeah. See, it's a remote grabber. Whatever. But I've attached a string to it, and I'm going to pull the grabber back up and pull the string up to this. Then I'm going to attach the power and ground cable from the amplifier to the string, and then use the string to pull it back down. As you can see, I've taped up the length of the power and ground wires from the amplifier. This is not regular electrical tape. This is called Tessa tape. It's used by automakers for wrapping wire. It's actually fabric based, sticks really well to itself, but it doesn't get all gooey in the heat like regular vinyl electrical tape does. So let me pull the cord up to here, and then we'll pull the power and grounds down to there, and I'll come right back. And as you can see, just like that, we've got the power and ground down to where we need them. For mounting the amplifier into the cavity, I think what I'm going to do is set it in here like this, and I'm going to secure it using this industrial strength Velcro. I'll put 2 wraps around the amplifier of the hook side, or the loop side, which is the soft side, and put some pieces of the hook side in here, and that should do a pretty good job of holding that in place. The connections on the XTRONS are a little bit higher than this, so we don't have to worry about the back of the XTRONS bumping into this or being too close and preventing us from making our electrical connections. There's plenty of room here for this. Alright folks, I'm not going to lie, it's a couple hours later, I'm done for the day, the amp is in, it sounds great. I'm going to be waiting for those RCA adapters to show up tomorrow morning so I can get those RCA connections finished up and get all the wiring behind the XTRONS in place, wrapped up, and done. But let me show you how I made the power connections for the amplifier. So if you look very carefully back there, do you see that orange thing right there? That is a factory grounding point for the car, and there are a couple of factory circuits that ground there, and that's where I attached the ground wire for the amplifier. You can see it sticking off there at about 7 o'clock right there. All you have to do is take a 10mm socket and undo the nut a little bit, and then you can slide that spade ground connector in there and then tighten it back up, and you got your ground. As for the power, come over here, you can see some of it sticking out here. This is a marine grade crimp connection, and on one side is the power wire that goes up to the amplifier, and the other side is my fuse holder, which is right here. That's the fuse holder, 15 amp. The other end of the fuse holder splices into the power wire for the power outlet / cigarette lighter. There are different ways to tap into that wire. Some are better than others. The easiest way for someone who may not have a lot of experience with soldering or anything would be to use something like a Scotch lock. Mechanics don't like them. I don't prefer to use those. So what I did was I stripped back about 1 inch of the insulation on that wire, and I wrapped the wire from the fuse holder around it, and I soldered them together, and I taped it up both with regular electrical tape and then Tessa tape on top of it. It's not the most professional way of doing it, but it's a permanent connection. It's not going to come undone, and it works. So there you go. So that's power for the amplifier, and like I said, tomorrow I will get those adapters and finish up the wiring behind the head unit, and I'll show you that in the morning. Well, it's the next morning and my RCA adapters showed up, so let's get them installed and finish up this wiring. Alright, I've got the RCA adapters installed and I've wrapped up the wiring as best as I'm going to. So if you look way in the back, you'll see that the factory harness adapter and the CAN bus module are sitting on the kind of the upper area of the cavity, wrapped in foam. And I've wrapped up the wiring as much as I'm going to in Tessa tape to try to protect it and keep it a little bit neat and organized, I guess. Doing the best you can. There's the adapter, the amplifier down there. Here are all the wiring adapters. Plug into the XTRONS, kind of neatly wrapped up as best I could. The power wire is back there. It's right there. That shouldn't be a problem where it's located. I don't think it's going to chafe on anything. But there it is. Let me hook everything back up and then I'll show you the final product. Alright, she's done. Sounding pretty good. I've taken her for a test drive. No rattles from the behind the dash, so we're in good shape. The last thing I did before I put the kick panel on down in the passenger footwell is I labeled that fuse for what it is and what the rating is, just in case future me or somebody else has to troubleshoot this and they need to know what it is. So I'm done with this. Definitely the sound has more clarity, depth. Vocals are much nicer, so I'm happy with it. Even with the stock speakers, I don't know that I'm going to replace the speakers in the car. Future Chris will decide that. So hopefully some part of this video helped you. If it did, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks and have a good day.